And I wanted to welcome everyone because, I really appreciate you carving out time in your day and joining us for what we hope will be an energizing and a practical conversation. So as you come out of your current context, whether it was a Zoom call or your head's down working on something, I wanted to set the stage with a question for all of us. Despite the tremendous progress we've made in corporate learning, building job-ready skills at scale is still hard. So how can we change that together? My name's Deep Ramanathan, as Cindy said. I'm the CMO of LearnIn, the world's first business tool designed to lift participation and build skills through learning stipends, a skills marketplace, and fully facilitated learning journeys. Today, I am excited to be joined by Pieter de Haes, Director, Global Head of Commercial Academy at Maersk, the world's largest shipping and transportation company. Peter's experience is tremendous. It ranges from general HR to driving global transformation programs, including starting up and managing several functional academies for the past 8 years at Maersk. Hey, Peter.
Hey, Deeps.
Great to see you.
Hello, everyone.
So thrilled for our conversation today. I cannot wait because you and I have been talking for months, actually, and we'll reveal a little secret to the audience. We've been talking for months about how to build modern academies, and today we've actually decided to reconstruct parts of that conversation, so just to be transparent and honest, because we felt like there was a lot of really great ideas and content that we wanted to share with the HCI members here today. So I can't wait to chat with you in a second a bit more about that. But because we're both big fans of peer learning, I want our audience to actually collaborate with us throughout this process. So I'm encouraging you, inviting you. We just love like questions and comments and ideas to make this a true conversation that we can answer, discuss, and even if we don't get to it in the time we have, we'd love to get back to you with thoughts and perspectives on the questions you have in mind. To warm us up, to get everyone into the conversation, we've got a 10-second pulse poll. So here it is, the question, the first one. This will be quick. So are you planning, think it could be interesting, or contemplating setting up academies to build a specific job-ready skill? And the way we think about academies, it's synchronous, cohorted, blended, contextual learning experiences. And we'll obviously learn more about that today. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, yes or no on that. I love how real time this is as well, by the way, Peter. This is pretty cool, like live poll.
Yeah, this is really cool. It helps us to engage with the audience a little bit more as well.
Very cool. So as it says, about 2/3 almost on yes. And any initial thoughts on this, reactions, Peter? It's nice to.
No, I think it makes sense. I think there's probably a lot of people interested in what do these corporate academies actually do, which hopefully is something that we will get to as well. And then we'll see whether maybe afterwards we're able to tilt the balance a little bit.
That's true. Let's try and do that. That's our goal. And by the way, we have Lisa here as well from LearnIn. She's joining us on chat. So if you throw your questions in chat, she'll share it with us, Peter and I throughout, and we'll actually try and get to some of your questions and discussion points throughout. So why don't we dive in? Let's get into one of the things that I want to start with. And Peter knows this. I'm an ex-IBMer, and I remember attending several academies over the years, right? Sales, marketing, product academies. And the one thing that I found in common was that these were large physical campuses, just like GE's Crottonville, where you had professors and buildings and huge capital expenditures. So Peter, do you want to just walk through like your thoughts on like what it means to build a modern academy for today?
Yes, absolutely, Deeps. No, and I think you're absolutely right also. When we talk about these corporate academies, I think a lot of people still have that view of these maybe more old school type of physical type of academies. And as you can see also, they usually had a few elements to them. Indeed, usually required a large investment. They often had physical buildings and faculty also there. They are always, or they have always been focused also on learning and really making sure that they put learning in place according to the business needs and the focus areas of the business as well. And really what they did is they built contextualized experiences, usually in a cohort-based way, to actually get people through, because that is also something that isn't a really effective way. We know that also through research, to actually help build that knowledge as well. Now, one of the downsides that we also sometimes saw with some of these academies was that it also was not always available to everybody. What we did see is it was a lot of times some of the high performers or some of the high potentials that got the opportunity to actually physically go to some of these academies. And that's actually where we said it sometimes is a little bit more for the lucky few, and not necessarily for everybody. And that has actually indeed changed quite a lot in the modern day world. And there's a couple of things that we took from the old version of the academies, which we actually kept because there are a lot of benefits to it. But we've also taken in a couple of changes, which will help us to actually even leverage this more and get more out of the whole academy model or the academy setup. So if you look at these new academies, so what has stayed the same? Basically, we're still focusing on functional learning journeys, and it's still all about the business needs. It's really making sure that we drive these business results. What are the required skills that we in our business need to be successful? Now, whether that's marketing, whether that is sales, whether that is operations, customer service, that doesn't matter, but it is about those targeted skills that a company really wants to have at the right level to be successful. It's also about really contextualizing that learning. So it's really more about the complex learning, and meaning, what do we mean with contextualizing? Meaning that we make it real life also for people in their day-to-day jobs, because this is how you learn. You can learn a theory, you can learn a concept, but it really becomes real when you start to contextualize it and apply it to your world and to your role and your job. And one of the other things that we've also kept in these new academies is actually the cohort-based learning, because that allows also for a lot of elements that really enable learning in the right way and allow it to stick. And that is also, of course, what we're aiming for. We want to get impact. We want to make sure that it works, and not that we send people through, but maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, they've forgotten what they have learned or the experience that they've gone through. Now, there's also a couple of things that are different. So instead of having to have this huge investment in infrastructure and really sort of like physical locations, with modern day technology, you don't really have to have that anymore. Actually, an academy can basically be a virtual place or a concept that allows you, through the right tools, processes, and support, to actually have that same feel and to also go through these experiences in the same way. That also means that we can do a lot of things with technology. So we really can leverage technology to enable the framework and the structure. We all know that right now, especially with the pandemic situation that has been happening over the past year and a half, that we can do so much more virtual as well. And this has been around for a long time. Okay, now we've seen a bit of a push because there wasn't any other option anymore. But there are a lot of these things that you can do to actually leverage the same type of learning experiences and get it out to a much larger audience. Also, meaning that we try to go away from this sense of, hey, it's for the chosen ones or the lucky few, but we really focus on democratizing learning for everybody and making sure that everybody has access to it wherever we can. And then there's also a couple of other things that we use the technology as well for. It's also to be scalable, right? I think not only can we go to these locations that we couldn't before, but it's also easier to actually get people through some of these experiences in a virtual setting. And then also, if you have the right tools, systems, and processes in place, that means that you can actually scale up some of these things much more easily than if you had physical faculty and a physical location where you have to, for instance, fly everybody into. And again, that also means that by leveraging this technology and now not being a physical space anymore, that we can really focus on blended learning, which a lot of the older corporate academies also had some form of blended learning. But we now have so many more modes of delivery and so many more modes where we can actually work on retrieval practice, putting things forward to our learners in a different way, so that we really focus on that retention as well and really make sure that the impact is there. So that's actually a bit more of the difference. But as you can see, we borrowed a lot from the old academies because there was a lot good going on there. But we really try to pull it into the, well, let's say 21st century and make sure that we leverage the things that we have to make it even more impactful.
Yeah, I mean, and Peter, like one of the things that's interesting, right? We had that poll, which is 60% or so saying they're looking, investigating, exploring, potentially thinking about academies. I actually love to hear from those folks in particular on just any thoughts you have on what makes it different. Are there things here that you're thinking about that's even different to how Peter's thinking about it? And so we can actually sort of encourage like a whole array of knowledge sharing here that we can then capture and send back to folks after the webinar as well. Because one of the things that we've realized is this is an evolving conversation, right? It's constantly changing. I think, like you said, COVID has added some additional dimensions to it. I think there's other factors that have made this, digital delivery, the fact that technology. So if we think about where we're headed in the future, there's so many more opportunities, in my perspective, that more teams can benefit, as you say. And there are more moments within the organization where skill building actually happens, right? So from onboarding to product launch to new tools, et cetera, et cetera. And so you could imagine applying different flavors of this academy, the modern academy, into those different skill building moments inside the organization. So I'd love to, just love to get the audience's thoughts. Even a few of you, I'm sure you've got some burning questions or thoughts that you can throw into the chat, and let's really try and get this conversation started here. So before we look ahead, Peter, one thing that I'd love to do is just look back. Your journey has been pretty phenomenal in terms of, starting up and building these academies. The big question always comes to my mind is the moment of why, right? Like suddenly there was this like spark that said, hey, maybe it wasn't that instant, but there's a moment to say, hey, let's build these academies. What's sort of the reason why you decided to invest, you and the organization decided to invest in academies?
Yeah, and I think that's a good question. There must be a reason why we're doing all this, right? And there's actually the way that I see it, and I think this is similar to many companies. Sort of three main reasons, probably more, and if you look at the whole picture, but probably three main reasons why we started and why a lot of companies start. I think first of all, we noticed that we had an issue, that some of the learning experiences and the skill building that we wanted to do wasn't really getting there. It wasn't as effective as it could be. And one of the things that we looked at there is, okay, why is this? Now, we had a lot of initiatives going on. There was actually quite a lot of content that was also available to people. But then we started to figure out that just providing content is actually not enough. And that's also some of the things that we see a lot with companies that are buying a lot of content packages, that are investing a lot in learning experience platforms, which I think is a great evolution. But what they are also finding out there is that actually it doesn't end there. Just putting it out there doesn't mean that suddenly you get those results. So that's why a lot of companies are saying, you know what, we need to do more than just provide content. And how do we then make this happen? Well, we actually create contextualized learning journeys, because that is where the impact actually comes from. So that means that you need to do a little bit more, and that is one of the main reasons why you start up something like an academy, to do more than just provide content, to put it into perspective for the employees, and for instance, for these more complex competencies and skills, really build a learning journey that contextualizes it for the employee, so you focus on that impact and you really get that learning transfer. Another element is also the focus that you can bring with an academy. So what we also see in a lot of companies is a lot of great initiatives also coming from HR and general L&D and other areas. But what we also sometimes see is that they're super broad. They try to do everything for all of the employees, which is also part of why they're there and what they are supposed to do. But that also means that it sometimes is less focused. And what really helps also with skill building and with the academy concept is the focus that you create, because you talk about a specific business objective, a specific impact, a specific KPI or a specific metric that you want to impact. And you're not talking about development for everything in the whole company. And that focus really also helps you to zoom in and basically get a few things done really well, rather than taking a shotgun approach and trying to hit everything at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last element, and I think I already briefly touched upon that, is really that contextualization of the learning. It's not just about providing content, but contextualizing that as well. We see a lot of times that there are certain programs and even great sort of e-learning programs that are out there that are really great at explaining the concept, but not necessarily help people to apply it into their day-to-day job. And that is really where that contextualization comes. And this is especially required with more of these complex competencies and skills, because those are the ones where you need to be able to put a lot of things together. And that is where it's not easy. So you need some guidance at first to be able to get there and to really get those results.
Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that's interesting about the reasons here is, how do you form the business case almost, right? Do you see like these reasons as opportunity to sort of create a business case for investment in, you might get to the, you're probably going to get to this later, but, it'd be interesting, because I just thinking on the fly, we might want to touch on it later, but I just thought,
Yes, and I think you're absolutely right. I'm glad that you also bring it up, because there's a reason for creating these academies, right? And that is indeed to get that business impact and to get those results. But also there's an investment. Either that could be an investment of maybe only $1,000, but it could be a really big investment as well, depending on how broad you want to go with your academy. And it is about putting forward a business case. You'll see also later around how we try to design academies and how we try to run academies. You have to show also what's in it for the business and for the learners. It's not just because it's fun to do or because we just want to develop people. We do have a goal where we're going towards, and that business goal needs to be clear for any of the business to invest in it as well.
So can you then talk about the impact that you've seen on as much as you can, obviously, some of it's internal, but the learners, the business, the impact on that, and maybe just setting some context about Maersk as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So within Maersk, as you mentioned, we're a global transportation and logistics company. Actually, about 1/5 of global trade is transported or managed in some way by Maersk. So in more of the B2B world, we're quite a big company. We have around about 80,000 employees globally in about 130 countries. And if we really talk about the scope of the academies, where we focus on within the commercial academy is actually basically all of the teams within our commercial functions, which means that ranges from some of the marketing teams, the sales teams, account management teams, sales support teams, all the way down to customer experience, which for us is also an important commercial role or commercial function. And then we're talking about around about 20,000 employees globally, also spread in different locations, and actually even in some of the different business units within the group. Now, we actually have several academies within the company or within the group because we believe in this model also, and we've seen the impact of it. And some of the things that we've seen that it brings is that there's actually sort of two ways that you can see it. So firstly, let's talk about it from the employee or the learner's perspective. So for them, having these academies around basically has brought a lot more clarity on their learning journey, because they're being guided through, and it's not just, hey, here is the menu and you have to figure out what you need to do or where you need to go. But also what they see and what they feel is, hey, there are these formal support mechanisms and structures in place, and these actually help me to learn and to be successful, not just even in the current role, but even growing towards future roles as well. And that is something that for employees really brings sort of this peace of mind, really making sure that they know, you know what, I am being helped and supported in my development to be successful in not only my current role, but even my next roles. And there are these places where I can go to, where I can rely on, that'll help get me there. It's not just up to me all by myself. And I think that is something that
That's really powerful
for the employees.
Right?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think
but
that's
even
no,
from
I think you're right.
a morale perspective, engagement, retention, it's probably significant value generated just from having that peace of mind, as you say, for learners.
Yeah, and it's really also having that peace of mind and that feeling that you get that you're being supported in being the best in your current job, in what you would like to develop in, and also where you want to go towards. And that is something that I don't think you feel in every company or in every organization. Sometimes, and I'm speaking this from my own experience, sometimes you really have to sort of make your own way or try to put things together to get any sort of an overview of how you can develop and can basically grow towards your current or your new role. And that is really something that these academies have brought for learners. And it spreads, like you said, in a lot of different areas. It helps the performance angle, but it's the employee satisfaction, it's the employee experience. It's really sort of the bigger thing around it, which is probably even more powerful than just okay, we now have people who are able to perform the roles because they have the right skills.
Perfect. And on the business side, do you want to share some of the thoughts around business impact potentially?
That's also, I think, one of the key things that we are able to really bring forward with academies. And this is where I'm a really big advocate also. And that is bringing that focus to the business on, hey, you know what? You have a certain issue or a certain problem you're trying to resolve. We're going to help you resolve it. So they now have a clear focus team surrounding with structures and mechanisms that can help also build engaging learning interventions, focus on that business outcome, because that's where we start with, but that's also what we measure and where we go back to the business with, so that they can also see, hey, you know what? There's a reason why we're doing this. This is, for instance, the sales targets that we want to have this year, and we notice that we are having an issue getting there because of X or Y reason. Let's take, for instance, virtual selling in this COVID or almost, I wanted to say post-COVID, but unfortunately we're not there yet. But in this world, that's one of the things where you can actually also say, hey, you know what? Yes, okay, that is an important aspect. We need to get more virtual or digital sales in. Let's then also build a program around it. Let's show the business what we can actually build, but then let's also show how are we going to anchor it and how we're going to measure it afterwards. And that return on investment angle is a really important angle for the business. And that is where they also see, you know what, this is not just a cost center. This is a strategic investment that will help us achieve results. And helping them to make that realization and that translation has been proven to be really powerful as well.
So Peter, getting some incredible questions. So I'm just going to take a little sort of shift in direction and talk to ask some of these questions. One question is particularly about, there's two questions actually that are combined by RJ and Renee. Thank you both for those questions. The question is, how do you find the metrics that will help prove the ROI and that training's impactful? And at the same time, and related to that, is how can we, do you have examples of contextual learning synergies and specific KPIs to measure, the value of the impact of contextual learning as well? So there's, is a KPI broadly, but also around like what are the metrics? How do we evaluate contextual learning too? So would love to hear.
Actually, I'm really happy with some of these questions as well, because those are, I think, some of the pressing questions that a lot of organizations and a lot of L&D teams face as well. So is it possible to give a 100% causation of what learning did? No, I also don't believe in that. What I do think is you can actually put a lot of metrics in place that are that you can measure to see whether the learning has any impact. Of course, it could be also if you deploy a learning program to increase your sales and suddenly market conditions are great, then it's the market conditions probably more who are determining the impact. But that doesn't mean that you cannot come up with any metrics that are actually close to it. And there's some really great work that has been done on this by Dr. Will Fallheimer, and we'll get to some of the references later. And what he uses is the learning transfer evaluation model. So a lot of people in L&D will be familiar with the Kirkpatrick model, and this is actually an evolution of that model with a lot of the new research that has been done around it in place. And I believe around 2018 was, I think, the latest update to the model. Now, what it does, it breaks things down in 8 different tiers or levels, and it helps you to design your programs in ways that you can measure those tiers and levels. And just to give you maybe a little bit more practical understanding of what does that mean, we have things that we're measuring around firstly, just the participation. So we have metrics around, are people registering? Are they actually completing the learning, yes or no? Now, that doesn't show you whether they've learned anything yet. So then what we also try to do is we try to put in wherever we can any sort of quiz or test or some sort of a business case that people can work around, which gives you a second layer. Now, what is important here is that that's also not going to tell you whether people are going to be able to apply all of that, but what it does do is it at least shows you were they able to retain some of the knowledge. Important here as well is don't do it right after they've done the learning, but keep some space in between. That's also one of the key things where you can see a little bit more where the knowledge retention has gone. Then what you'll have is items or cases where you can actually have people think about making decisions with what they've learned, and you can actually start to measure that as well. You can do that through gamified learnings, you can do that through scenarios, and those things you can start to measure. Now, if you want to go all the way up to the business results, and I'll give an example of some of the programs that we're actually working on and deploying right now. For some of our selling programs, for instance, we are running and deploying a value-based selling program. What we do is we measure the attendance, we measure some of these tests. We then also try to see whether they can make some decisions based off of cases that we let them work on. Then we also have some other elements in place to make sure that we have a coaching framework around it so that it really gets applied in the day-to-day work. But then we also start to measure, for instance, do we have more products that are now in our sales pipeline? Is our sales pipeline now actually larger in the areas where we've deployed this training? For customer experience or customer service, the places where we did deliver the training, are we now seeing an increase in net promoter score or an increase in customer satisfaction or a decrease in issue resolution time? These measurements will give you a really good idea around some of the impact you're having on the business. But as I mentioned at the start, is it 100% causation? Probably not. That's not something we can guarantee outside of a controlled experiment, so to speak. But it'll get you very, very close to it, and you will be able to see these trends, and then actually use a lot of the data analytics, such as regression analysis, etc., to really see what are the trends, where is this linked. And one of the things we'll share at the end of the presentation is also some of the resources, and I would really encourage you to go through some of the work of Will Thalheimer, and then think about what this could mean for you. Because I believe that there is still a lot we can do in terms of showing the actual impact of our learning interventions. And if you can get to the actual result measure, at least we can look at some leading measures. And those leading measures should also be able to help predict some of the business result as well.
Cool. Thanks, Peter. And RJ and Renee, I hope that sort of addresses some of the questions you had. I thought we'd move to a poll real quick, just to get some perspective from the audience as well. So, what is the biggest barrier to driving skill building at scale across every team in the organization? So, is it lack of time, lack of content, lack of expertise, lack of resources? Very quick poll. So we'll give you like a few seconds. Top biggest barrier only. So the first thing that comes to your mind. And I'd love to see answers here, responses. Always time. Resources is an interesting one. Interesting about content, isn't it? Like, it goes back to what you said around, a lot of content exists. Any quick reactions to this, Peter?
Well, actually, it is very much how I also imagined that it would be. I was interested to see indeed whether the content would still be up there, but usually it's time and resources. So it's quite interesting to see that this resonates also. I think this is the same picture in many companies across different industries, I guess.
Cool. I mean, because this actually leads to one of the things that we've talked a lot about is the practical side of building an academy, right? So moving into sort of how, right? How do we actually deliver on this? Where to start? And then what are the key steps to actually moving forward, given the constraints of time and resources, right? Like there's always going to be those constraints. So why don't we dive into a bit more about, the practical steps around, building an academy. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and how you thought about it at Maersk.
Yeah, I think it is always a bit of a daunting question or a daunting task if you look at sort of like a big academy or a big concept in front of you. But actually, it doesn't always need to be because even us, we started very small. The very first academy that I built was just a one-man show that was basically me, myself, and Irene, so to speak. And then we actually built upon that from there. But I think the most important thing to do or to start with is really first get a little bit of the lay of the land. Look at how are your learning programs managed currently? Who actually designs and delivers training? Is it a separate team, a separate function? Is it something that happens ad hoc? Is there actually a structure around it? Looking also at some of the subject matter expertise. Do you have trainers or content experts or subject matter experts in your teams? Do you have communities around it? Are they involved in training at all, yes or no? And then also looking a bit more around what is the learning ecosystem or the digital learning landscape that you have. Do you have any LMS available? Are there any knowledge sharing platforms that you have? Do you have any other things such as SharePoint, maybe a learning experience platform? And then also looking at maybe if there are any content solutions available within the organization that are hosted on that LMS, or maybe other resources where the company has access to behind a certain portal where they've actually bought into certain resources or a certain library of content as well. And that is, I think, the first thing to do. Really look at, okay, what is the lay of the land and what do we have in place before you even start to think about the rest of the academy, because this will influence sort of the rest of your game plan, so to speak. Once you've done that, and once you've been able to go through that, then there are actually a couple of steps or more practical steps that you can take and things that you can think about as well.
And I think that makes, that's just the start. So, and it's interesting, right? Those questions are just almost like an audit, right, of the current situation. And maybe one thing we could do is if it's useful for the audience, we could put together some of these questions as material that we could send back out after the session, if that's helpful. The big thing that is on my mind is around the major steps almost, right? Like how do you actually approach each of the pieces here? So, and I'm sure it's on the audience's mind as well. So why don't we dive into those steps and sort of walk through that? And in the meantime, in the chat, one thing I'd love the audience to sort of talk about is really what does an academy, the success of an academy look like in your mind, right? Like what is a successful academy? It could be KPIs, a vision for it, etc. And then we'll circle back to that at the end of the session if we have time, just to have a discussion about different perspectives on academies as well. But why don't we dive into the meaty part of the conversation around, let's build these academies, let's get these going, sort of thing.
I'd be happy to start with a couple of practical steps and things to do also, because indeed it sounds, I think, to a lot of people like a great concept, but it's always about how do you get started? What are some of the things to take into consideration, or how do you sort of break down the elephant into chunks and really get started on it? I think the first thing that for me has always been important is look at where it starts with. And it really starts with your customer. And I think that is very important to realize also who is your customer. And you have two customers. You have the business on the one hand, because you're trying to resolve one of the business issues and trying to get to a certain goal or achieve something. But then you also have your learners, the people who are going through, the employees that are actually going through these contextualized learning experiences. And you will always have to come back to those. I remember one of the very first academy that I've built for one of the smaller business units within the group as well. I made a big analysis. I looked at all of the data that was out there. I actually just spent a few years traveling a lot of the different sites to firsthand experience what some of the issues were. And I came back with a great plan and a great idea of how I would resolve all of this. And I started to execute. And I was just going and going and going. And I actually very quickly sort of hit my nose against the wall because I hadn't really spoken enough to my stakeholders or thought about my customers enough. All of the business stakeholders that I wanted to interact with or that I was doing this for to help them with, they were really hesitant. They were actually pushing back. And because I was alone at the time, I didn't have the resources. I was relying on them to provide me some time of those resources. And I never thought of it enough from the what's in it for them and what's their angle. And that is really important, that before you start anything, make sure that you start with knowing your customers, knowing the business, what that they need, and then also the learners themselves. What is my population? Where do we see some of the gaps or some of the specific focus areas that we're going to focus, maybe populations that we're going to focus on as well. Which then takes me into the second thing. Which business problem are you trying to resolve? Probably one of the most important questions as well. Before you design any learning intervention or any academy, it's really important to define what is the issue or the strategic goal. Really trying to determine what are we now trying to resolve, then looking at what is the root cause and what does success look like. Because once you've determined success, then you can start building those learning interventions or your academy or your framework around it. But then you always can work sort of like backwards with the end in mind. It also gives you a good idea. These are some of the metrics that I afterwards would like to focus on as well, to show or to prove that what I've done has been impactful. So this is really one of those key sort of started questions. What problem am I trying to resolve? And really detailing out that problem. Very high level is usually not enough to come down to a good enough problem statement to get to the root cause. Then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, really make sure that you know who your stakeholders are and what are their points of view and their needs. Like I mentioned, this is something that in the very beginning when I started my first academy, I hit my nose against the wall because I thought I was going to change the world. I had this big plan, but I didn't really speak to the stakeholders and what their needs or their points of view were. For some, other elements were more important than others. It also was for me to understand where they were coming from and, for instance, which projects or other initiatives they had going on. There were some that said, really great what you're doing, but come talk to me in half a year because right now I'm actually implementing this new customer and this is for now the biggest thing for these 4 countries. And if you don't speak to your stakeholders, you don't know what they need or what their points of view are, you're going to run into these issues. And I would even suggest that before starting anything, make yourself a stakeholder map, just a lay of the land. See who's there, see what are their needs, who are the people that you need to talk to, and then also see who are some of the people that are crucial for your success as well. Because you will find that there are, as in any organization or in any transformation or in any change management initiative or program, you have people that you can really rely on and that you can leverage if you approach them in the right way and also look at what's in it for them. Then not only stakeholders, but really start to look also who are your supporters. Like I said, you will have people in the organization that are some of your champions, people who have been involved in learning maybe already for 10, 20 years within their current role and in their previous roles, and that are really advocates of learning. People who are now giving training, people who are now part of a training community, or maybe even just experts on the job that help onboard new employees, for instance. And what you will see is if you go and speak to some of these experts and you try to find them and you try to find who your supporters are, they are going to be some of your best assets and your best friends because they will help to create the momentum to drive this in the organization as well. But they are also the ones that come up with great ideas, or they have already tried something in a team here, or they've already tried something in this country there, or they've created a really great mechanism or a way of, even if it's just something where they have thought about, you know what, this is how we make things into 2-minute videos to help our people when they are filling in some of their forms, for instance. Some of these little pockets and nuggets you will find also by really looking at your organization and getting those supporters in. And then I guess one of the bigger things also is really about that focus, right? Don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to do everything at the same time, but start small. Start with one focus area or one team or one population, and then also build your programs in an agile way. Use pilots so that you can actually get feedback and you can change and adapt very quickly rather than building full programs and full things for months and then putting it out there and realizing that you've kind of missed the ball. And this also helps to build your academy and build your momentum. You start small, you build those small wins, and when you have them, you actually focus on them, you communicate them, you put them out there, and then you can gain momentum. To make sure that you also start small and that you're able to scale up, it's important to then also focus on the framework, the processes that come around it. So the next point that I think really would help to make sure that you're able to build a scalable academy is first think about what are the processes, the governance, and the framework that I want to put in place. And whether that is manual and whether that is one person, that doesn't really matter, because afterwards you can augment it or add it with more people or with technology or with other things. But if you at least have the concept working and you help also people to understand how it works, then it's much more easier to scale up afterwards and to then add more programs or bigger populations or other aspects that you're looking at. But this is, I think, really important. Try to figure out a process and a methodology that you write out and that you can easily run through yourself or explain to the organization so that it's clear for them, and then the rest will actually be much easier to scale afterwards. As I mentioned, also use technology, but use it as a vehicle to get to where you want to go, but don't use it as the solution itself. And this is, again, also something where I've also in the past had a few failures and sort of knocked my head against the wall as well. With one of the previous academies that I ran, and actually also in the previous company or business unit, we actually developed a mobile app also to house all of our competency frameworks, to put all of our skills matrices, the assessments in, to put basically a lot of the governance and the framework that we had under the academy into a nice, easy app for people to use. Now, that worked really great in the locations where people were already using this type of way of working and the processes and the governance behind it. And they loved it. They were like, yes, give me more. But the places where they weren't yet used to this way of working and where the processes weren't yet clear and the governance wasn't clear, we got almost no traction because the technology isn't the thing that helps it. The technology helps if the process and the framework is clear, and then it enables people to either do things faster, to be more scalable, to do any of those things, but not as the sort of end solution itself.
Yeah, before we move on to the next point, I'll give you a chance to take a sip of water or something as well. But you know, we have a question. It's connected to this technology point, which is, you know, which is more about the idea. And this is from RJ. So thank you for the question. Everyone, please send more questions through because we're more than happy to answer them. You know, some organizations and even countries have actually sought to utilizing gaming as a platform for learning and skill building. You know, does that align with your thoughts and experience? I know the most important point that you're making here is, you know, technology is not the solution in itself. But do you see a role for a platform like that, where it's more gamified to drive the learning experience, or at least fuel the learning experience?
Absolutely, and I think that what it really boils down to is if you design your games or the gamified material well with the right principles in mind, absolutely, and I think we'll see more and more of this. But also being completely honest, gamification is actually a concept that we already know from the 60s, because that is actually when we already had certain ways of teaching people through games as well. So absolutely, we'll see more of that. But what is really important there is make sure that you design it well, and that is, I think, a very core thing. You have a lot of hypes and a lot of also myths sometimes around learning, like learning styles, for instance. One of the most pervasive myths in L&D, it's simply not true. There's research behind why this is not the case. And if you use the research and evidence informed techniques, then you will for sure find a lot of value in a lot of the new technologies using these principles. And gamification is one of them. We'll see a lot more of that, and something that we are also using and using more and more within the group as well.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Peter. I know you have a few of the 10 considerations left, but I didn't mean to derail you. But
No, I think this is good. The more that it's interactive, the better, because it really, I mean, the goal here is so that people can use and do something with it, and that they feel like they've got something out of this. So I like this.
Right.
I think one of the things we already touched upon a little bit earlier was the measurements, right? But I think this is also a key element that I want to bring across. Try to measure the effectiveness of your learning interventions. And like I said, really try to make sure that you focus on the things or the elements that you can measure or that are leading indicators. And if possible, for anybody, I would recommend look up Dr. Will Thalheimer and the learning transfer evaluation model. It has a lot of practical tips on how you can start to measure these things, but also measure where it's sensible. Don't try to measure everything just for the sake of measuring. Measure what is sensible, and also look at what is the resources that I need to put into measuring these things. Within our academies, we do the same thing. We also look at if it's a really super heavy bespoke program, yeah, we measure a lot. If it's a smaller intervention, which is maybe more of somebody needs to know something about an update to a process, yeah, then we're not going to measure everything, because that also doesn't make sense. So balance it out again. Then one of the things that I probably cannot stress enough, in most companies, this is a very big shift in mindset and way of thinking around learning. So that also means that you need to focus a lot on change management and communication. Rather over communicate than not communicate enough around what you're doing and how things work and what it'll bring. But also try to realize that not everybody is at the same place in their change journey. Some people might already be on board, whereas other people or teams might still be at the phase like, you know what, I don't want to try anything new. I'm still a little bit cautious about what's going to come here. So that is something to really focus on as well. And also, like I said in the beginning, don't do the same sort of failure as I did in the beginning with just going. Really get your stakeholders on board, talk to people, see where they're coming from. How can you help them along in this journey? And that is how you will get somewhere and how you will get people to support you, and you will create this sort of momentum and traction as well. And then to end it with, this is also a bit more around what we started with, I guess, in terms of the developing or building some of these academies. Basically, the biggest or best advice that I can give you is really look at it also as you would at any company or any business. Run it as a business. You have your customers. You have the people that are willing to invest or offer something for your product. You've got your business, you've got your end users, you've got your learners, just like with a software or a technology company. And you need to also make sure that you put the right products and services in place that actually help the customers and their needs, and then also provide some measurements so you can show, you know what, this is how it works and how I can improve my programs, how I know that I'm giving the best return on investment and the best quality to my customers. And as long as you think about it with sort of like a good business leader mindset, that is really where I think you'll be able to to get the most out of if you keep looking at your academy in that way. Don't think of it as a cost center. Don't think of it as just a team or as a function, but really as a company providing services to the business and to the learners.
That's an amazing mindset, isn't it? It's almost like a managed service, right? Back into the business that is fully run, engaged, connected to the business goals as well as the learner goals. So there's like a nice little, almost like a Venn, you know, a two circle Venn.
Yeah, like a Venn diagram. Yeah.
I think visually, you know. So I thought it'd be great. Like you mentioned resources a few times. So why don't we dive into like speaking to some of the resources in the next minute or so, and then I've got I want to open it up to Q&A for the audience as well if we have a few minutes left at the end. So if we could chat about those resources, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. So one I already mentioned, right? And there's many more, and also I'd be happy to, like you said, Deep, create an overview and share some more. But Dr. Will Thalheimer, excellent researcher and practitioner, also has been doing more than 20 years of work around learning and development in also a company and business setting, and really is super great at trying to define how can you make some of these measurements as well, and how can you design some impactful learning. One of the things that I also think is really important is when you're designing these programs, like I alluded to a little bit earlier, don't try to, or try not to be too persuaded by some of the fads and hypes that are out there, but really look at what are the principles of how do people actually learn. Because there are things to say around bite-sized learning. Yes, absolutely, bite-sized learning is super important, but only 2-minute videos every time is actually not the best way to learn. And that is why some of these books, like How People Learn by Nick Shackleton-Jones, really goes into the research and the neurology and the psychology of how do people learn. Understanding that will help you to also make sure that you really focus on the things that are research based or research informed, instead of going for some of these hypes. And the same goes for the next one, evidence informed learning design. Actually, one of the books that I read, I think in the beginning of this year or at the end of last year, really great overview of how do I now design these blended learning contextualized sort of journeys, focusing on the elements that actually make sense and that make sure that people actually learn and that there's an impact. And then the same goes for the last one there, Patty Shank. For those who don't know her yet, also a long-term L&D practitioner, somebody who has been doing a lot of work also on the programs itself, but also on how to use, for instance, things, even simple things like multiple choice questions. How can you actually get good multiple choice questions and quizzes or tests at the end of your learning that actually make sure that you get the right thinking or the right knowledge behind it, and not the typical like the ones you have at the end of these compliance learnings where you have to just check a few boxes and get an 80% score to pass. Like I said, Thieves, there is a lot more out there than just this, but these are a few things that I think will really already help people along and where they can find a lot more references from these people or these places as well.
Awesome. That's so helpful, Peter. Like the last thing is a poll, because actually it's connected to the resources here, which is a question really for the audience, which is, as a next step for you in your support and the development and rollout of skill building learning journeys or academies, or this models that Peter talked about, which of these three would you need more materials in and support in? I'd love to hear about that and be able to support you as you start to take this journey, or you continue to take this journey forward. Now we got about 4 minutes, and I believe maybe I'll bring Cindy back in. Maybe there's time for one question. Not sure if there is, but one live question or one question at the end for the Q&A. And before I do that, I briefly just want to say thank you again, Peter, for making the time. And maybe there's one or two questions, and then we can close up in the next few minutes.
Very welcome, and happy to do so.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Folks, if you, as you know, we were playing this a little bit by ear. We wanted to make sure we got through this wonderful conversation. So if you do have some questions, please feel free to post them there in that Q&A box. So let me check real quick. Deeps, Peter, let me just check real quick. I think we might have, let's see.
Well, if we don't have a question, I have another question for Peter as well. I've constantly asked.
Yeah, I love it. Go ahead, Deeps.
So, this is an opportunity not just for L&D or the learning team to focus on academies, but potentially offer a decentralized, model where we can offer academy lights back to an academy light back to the organization. So line of business leaders could even run their own smaller academies, right? Within some model that is defined by the L&D team, potentially. How do you think about, like, let's call it scaling potentially academies so that we self-run, if that's even
Yeah, I think I understand a little bit where you're coming from, because there are a few things there. Indeed, academies, because they're usually focused and are really sort of focused on certain interventions, probably they won't do all of the learnings, and they will usually focus on maybe either, if you have a company, on global or really like strategically prioritized initiatives, and maybe not everything underneath. But I do think that this is where academies can help to create that framework and sort of that governance around it. But this is where I think that what academies should also do is provide those tools and provide the things so that actually the local teams can use the same framework and use the same model. And actually, like you said, sort of run an academy light or run their own sort of versions of this, of course, within a certain framework so that it's the same sort of processes and model. But it doesn't all need to be centrally governed. First of all, you won't get all of the content if it's centrally governed, because there's things that are locally or contextualized differently that you won't get from an academy perspective. But also, I think it's really important to make sure that you provide that opportunity to the teams to be self-sufficient as well and to really thrive in the same way.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Well, again, thank you for making so much time and sharing with us your wonderful insights. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the audience as well. Some phenomenal questions. And I'll hand it back to HCI. Thanks very much for your time. And if you want to get in touch with us, you'll have the contact details as part of the presentation. So more than happy to hear from any of you and all of you about any questions you have as well. So thanks
Absolutely.
so much.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Deeps.
Thanks, Deeps. Thanks, Peter. I don't know about anyone else in the audience, but I was fascinated. Thank you so much for your list of 10 there. I think those tactical elements of how to get something done is so useful, whether we are seasoned in the field, whether we're new in the field. It just really gives us a place to start. So I know I had my phone out, I was taking pictures. So I really appreciate that, giving us that real straight on knowledge. And thank you so much for your insights during this hour together. So thank you so much. All right, folks. Well, let's just a quick reminder for you all, especially our HCI members, that today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit, as well as for HCI recertification. Your credits for attending this webcast will soon show up in your My HCI profile under the transcript tab. While you're there, don't forget to check out hci.org for even more insights, as well as information on our certifications and events. I'd like to, of course, thank you to Peter Deeps so much. Thank you for your presentation and your time today, and to the good people at LearnIn for sponsoring us today during this webcast. Also, thank you all to our viewers. We couldn't do it without you. Thanks for spending this last hour with us, and we'll see you next time.